The hull of the starship did not vibrate with the mechanical hum of an engine. It breathed. Ethan Cole sat on the edge of his bunk in the guest quarters, his hands clasped tightly together to stop the tremors that still ghosted through his fingers from a war he had left behind 3 years ago. The walls around him were not made of cold durasteel or riveted titanium. They were composed of a calcified pearlescent bone, warm to the touch, veined with capillaries of pulsing blue light that acted as the ship's internal illumination. This was the Ethelgard, a Dravari diplomatic cruiser, though calling it a cruiser felt like a misnomer. It was a leviathan, a living organism bred for the vacuum of space, and right now, it was carrying him into the heart of the predator's den. He stood up and walked to the membrane that served as a viewport. The bioglass was semi-permeable to light but harder than diamond. Outside, the stars were stretching, blurring into streaks of indigo and violet as the Leviathan began its deceleration burn. Ethan adjusted the collar of his dress uniform. It felt too tight. He was a linguist now, a cultural liaison, but his body remembered the weight of armor. He remembered the smell of ozone and burning plastic from the trenches on Mars during the separatist wars. He was not supposed to be the face of humanity. He was supposed to be the guy in the back room translating syntax. But the Galactic Concord had been specific. They did not want a career politician. They wanted someone who understood the language of conflict, because the Dravari did not speak in platitudes. They spoke in power. A chime sounded, not from a speaker, but resonating from the bone walls themselves. The holographic emitter in the center of the room flared to life. It was a recording of Ambassador Reeves, the head of the Terran delegation, who was currently in cryo-sleep in the adjacent chamber. "Ethan, listen to me," Reeves's voice said, the image flickering slightly. "We are hours away from Varaxis Prime. I need you to understand the precariousness of our position. Earth has barely scraped by the admission criteria for the Galactic Concord. We are seen as volatile, young, dangerous. The Dravari Empire is the gatekeeper. If they vote against us, we are not just denied entry. We are reclassified as a threat species. That justifies containment, subjugation, even extermination." Ethan had heard the briefing a dozen times, but the chill never lessened. "Do not let them provoke you." The hologram continued. "The Dravari culture is built on dominance hierarchies. They will test you. They will try to frighten you. If you flinch, we look weak. If you respond with aggression, we look dangerous. You must walk the razor's edge. End recording." The light faded. Ethan took a deep breath, inhaling the recycled air that smelled faintly of ozone and something muskier, like exotic spices. The ship shuddered. A massive muscular contraction rippled through the floorboards as the Ethelgard dropped out of warp. Ethan looked out the viewport and his breath caught in his throat. Varaxis Prime was not a planet. It was a jewel set in the velvet darkness of the void. It orbited a massive crimson sun that bathed the world in a perpetual blood-colored twilight. The planet itself was wrapped in rings of glittering dust, but it was the surface that held his gaze. From orbit, he could see rivers of bioluminescent light snaking across the dark continents like glowing arteries. There were no oceans of water, only vast shimmering seas of liquid methane that reflected the red sun like polished copper. Towering bioengineered spires pierced the cloud layer. Organic skyscrapers grown from coral and crystal that bent and swayed slightly in the atmospheric winds, defying gravity with an elegance that human architecture could never replicate. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It looked like a world that could swallow you whole and digest you over 1,000 years. "We have achieved orbit," the ship's pilot announced. her voice projecting directly into the room via the organic acoustic conduits. Descent sequence initiated. Prepare for gravity shifts. The descent was smooth, but the sensation was unnerving. As the living ship entered the atmosphere, the walls turned a deep, flushed red, reacting to the heat of re-entry. Ethan felt the artificial gravity fluctuate, the floor beneath him tilting like the deck of a ship at sea. When they finally docked, it was not at a metal gantry, but into a massive flowering structure that grasped the Ethelgard with tender tendrils. The airlock spiraled open like the iris of a giant eye. Ethan stepped out onto the landing platform of the Imperial Palace. The heat hit him first, heavy, humid, and thick with the scent of blooming night flowers and ozone. Then came the scale of it. The palace was a colossal organism, a mountain of living crystal and white bone that seemed to grow directly out of the planet's crust. The corridors were not built, they were arteries. The floor was a semi-rigid cartilage that gave slightly under his boots, absorbing the sound of his footsteps. A delegation of Dravari guards awaited them. They were tall, towering over Ethan's 6-foot frame, their skin spanning shades of twilight blue and violet. Their armor was chitinous, grown rather than forged, shimmering with an iridescent sheen. They held staffs that crackled with contained plasma energy. "This way, human," the lead guard hissed. His voice sounded like grinding stones. Ethan followed, flanking Ambassador Reeves, who had just awakened, looking pale and disoriented. They were led through corridors that defied Euclidean geometry. The walls breathed, expanding and contracting in a slow, rhythmic cycle. At one point, the gravity shifted entirely, and they found themselves walking up what appeared to be a vertical wall, the transition seamless and nauseating. He felt like a virus invading a massive body. He felt like prey walking into the stomach of a beast. They arrived at the ceremonial reception hall. The room was vast, the ceiling lost in shadows far above, supported by rib-like arches of translucent bone. Floating globes of soft yellow light drifted through the air like lazy jellyfish, illuminating the gathered court. Hundreds of Dravari nobles stood in clusters. They were terrifyingly beautiful. Their eyes were large, lacking whites, filled with swirling metallic colors, gold, silver, bronze. Bioluminescent markings, unique to each individual, glowed faintly on their skin, shifting in intensity with their moods. They wore robes of woven spider silk and armor made from the scales of deep-sea leviathans. As the humans entered, the conversation died. Hundreds of predatory eyes turned to lock onto them. The silence was heavy, a physical weight pressing down on Ethan's shoulders. Ambassador Reeves stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We present ourselves before the Imperial Court of..." He was cut off by a sound, a low, vibrating purr that seemed to emanate from the shadows near the throne. A figure detached itself from the darkness. She was taller than Ethan, moving with a fluid, liquid grace that made her seem to glide rather than walk. Her skin was a deep, rich indigo, marked with intricate patterns of glowing cyan bioluminescence that coiled up her neck and disappeared beneath the high collar of her ceremonial armor. The armor itself was a work of art, black chitin edged in gold, form-fitting and lethal. She circled the human delegation, ignoring the ambassador entirely, her focus narrowing on Ethan. Ethan held his ground, forcing his heart rate to remain steady. He locked eyes with her. Her irises were spun silver, metallic and piercing, reflecting his own face back at him in distorted miniature. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. She smelled of ozone and something sharp, like crushed mint and iron. "So," she said. Her voice was a contralto melody, smooth but with a dangerous edge, like a velvet-wrapped dagger. This is the best the mudball planet could send. She leaned in, her lips curving into a smirk that revealed the tips of retractable, needle-sharp fangs. You look soft, she murmured, her eyes raking over his shoulder. A soft-shouldered mammal. Do you even have claws, little diplomat? Or are you just here to be eaten? The courtiers tittered, a sound like rustling dry leaves. Ethan knew this test. He had studied the sociological profiles. The Dravari respected strength, but they despised posturing. Wit was their preferred weapon of choice in the court. He met her gaze without blinking. I left my claws at the border. Your Highness, Ethan replied. He switched effortlessly from standard to high Dravari, the dialect reserved for the warrior caste and royalty. It was a guttural, complex language that required precise control of the throat muscles. One tends to avoid bringing weapons to a peace negotiation. Unless, of course, you are afraid you cannot handle a conversation without a threat of violence. The silence in the hall shattered. A few gasps echoed from the nobles. A human speaking high Dravari with a flawless accent was unheard of. The princess froze. Her silver eyes widened for a fraction of a second, the bioluminescent markings on her neck flaring a brighter blue, a sign of surprise. Then, the smirk deepened, becoming something more genuine, perhaps even impressed. She tilted her head, studying him with renewed interest. You speak the high tongue, she said, switching back to standard but with a slower, more deliberate cadence. And your accent. It is archaic. You sound like a history book from the Third Dynasty. I had good teachers, Ethan said, keeping his face neutral but allowing a small spark of amusement to reach his eyes. And your accent in standard highness is charming. It has a distinct lilt, almost distinct enough to hide the threat behind it. Princess Kalira laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound that made the guards grip their weapons tighter. I like this one, she announced to the room, turning her back on him but casting one last glance over her shoulder. He has a spine. Let us see if he keeps it when the real games begin. She swept away toward the high table, the crowd parting for her like water around a shark. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Ambassador Reeves leaned in, his face pale. Good God, Cole. You just insulted the heir to the throne. No, sir, Ethan whispered, watching the glowing patterns on Kalira's back as she walked. I just introduced myself. The welcome banquet was an exercise in sensory overload. The tables were laden with dishes that looked alive, quivering jellies, roasted joints of meat from beasts Ethan couldn't identify, and decanters of neon-colored nectar that smoked when poured. Ethan sat at the lower end of the high table, flanked by Dravari nobles who treated him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. He noticed the side glances. They were subtle, fleeting looks exchanged between generals and high-ranking ministers. Smiles that didn't reach their eyes, fingers tapping nervous rhythms on the table edge. The atmosphere was brittle. It felt like the air before a thunderstorm. Kalira sat 3 seats away, picking at a piece of fruit that bled violet juice. She wasn't looking at him, but he felt her attention. It was a physical weight, like a laser dot on the back of his neck. Under the cover of the general noise, she leaned slightly toward him, her voice pitching low so only he could hear. Do not eat the blue tuber, she murmured, not turning her head. It causes hallucinations in species with carbon-based nervous systems. Unless you wish to spend the next 4 hours fighting imaginary void dragons on the table. I would avoid it. Ethan slowly lowered his fork. Thank you for the warning. Do not mistake it for kindness, Kalira said, finally looking at him. Her glowing tattoos had dimmed to a low, steady pulse. It would be boring if you died of incompetence before the negotiations even started. Is that the only danger here? Ethan asked, scanning the room. Incompetence? Kalira took a sip of her drink, her silver eyes scanning the room with predatory sharpness. Look around you, soldier. Half this court made their fortunes conquering star systems that look just like yours. Peace is bad for business. If this treaty fails, they get to build a new fleet. They get to expand. So we are walking into a trap, Ethan concluded. We are walking into a nest of vipers, she corrected. I am just trying to determine if you are a mongoose or a mouse. Before Ethan could respond, a chime resonated through the hall. A tall Dravari male with scars crossing his face stood up at the head of the table. This was Lord Varric, Kalira's cousin and the High Commander of the Imperial Fleet. He had the same regal bearing as Kalira, but without the grace. His movements were jagged, forceful. Honored guests. Varric boomed, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. We have spoken of peace, but words are wind. The Dravari believe in truth. He gestured, and a servant brought forward a pedestal. Resting on it was a sphere of swirling, milky glass, pulsing with a faint inner light. The neural resonance sphere, Varric announced. A relic of our ancestors. It connects the psych patterns of two individuals. It reveals true intent, no lies, no deception, just the raw echo of the soul. Varric turned his cold, golden eyes toward the human delegation. If the humans are truly here for peace, surely they have nothing to hide. Ambassador Reeves looked terrified. Ethan knew why. Every diplomat had secrets. Every government had contingency plans. If the Dravari saw the classified defense protocols in Reeves's mind, the treaty was dead. I will take the test, Ethan said, standing up before Reeves could object. The room went silent. Varric sneered. You are a translator, a servant. He is the liaison. Kalira interrupted, standing up slowly. Her voice cut through the room. And he is the one I have been speaking with. If I am to trust their words, I must know the mind behind them. She stepped down from the dais, moving toward the sphere. I will conduct the resonance. Varric looked displeased, his jaw tightening, but he could not publicly defy the princess. Very well. Ethan walked to the pedestal. The sphere hummed, a sound he felt in his teeth. Kalira stood opposite him, the sphere between them. Up close, she was overwhelming. The sheer alien vitality of her, the glow of her skin, the metallic scent, the sharpness of her features was dizzying. Place your hand on the surface, she commanded softly. Ethan reached out. His palm met the cool glass. Kalira placed her hand on the opposite side. For a second, nothing happened. Then the world dissolved. It wasn't like reading a book. It was a tsunami. Ethan gasped as the barrier between their minds vanished. He didn't see her thoughts in words. He felt them in raw, visceral sensation. He felt the cold, crushing weight of expectation, the pressure of 1,000 years of royal lineage pressing down on her spine. He felt a sharp, jagged loneliness, a solitude so deep it felt like the void of space. He felt her predatory instinct, a constant humming drive to hunt, to chase, to dominate, which she kept on a tight leash every single second of every day. And she felt him. Ethan tried to shield his mind, but the resonance was too strong. He knew she could feel the battlefield, the smell of burning ozone on Mars, the scream of his squadmate as the bunker collapsed, the guilt, the crushing, suffocating guilt that he had survived when better men hadn't. He felt her recoil, not in disgust but in shock. She had expected a soft diplomat. She found a wounded predator. "You are broken," her voice echoed in his mind, not a sound, but a thought. "We all have ghosts," he projected back. "You fight not to conquer," she realized, her mental voice tinged with wonder. "You fight to protect." It is strange and sad. The intimacy was terrifying. It was closer than touch, deeper than a kiss. For 10 seconds, they were one entity, a swirling mix of human trauma and alien instinct. Then, Kalira tore her hand away. The connection snapped. Ethan stumbled back, gasping for air, clutching the edge of the pedestal. The room spun. Kalira was breathing hard, her chest heaving, her bioluminescence flaring wildly, shifting from calm blue to a turbulent violet. She stared at him, her eyes wide. The mockery was gone. In its place was something raw, shaken. "He is truthful," Kalira announced to the room, though her voice lacked its usual imperious strength. "There is no deception in him." Varric looked disappointed, his eyes narrowing as he watched the strange tension between the human and his cousin. "Take your seats," the Empress commanded from her high throne, speaking for the first time. "The feast continues." Ethan sat down, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He grabbed a goblet of water and downed it. He could still feel Kalira in the back of his mind, a phantom echo of silver light and sharp teeth. He looked up and caught her watching him again. She didn't look away this time. She looked like she was trying to solve a puzzle that had just bitten her back. The banquet dragged on, but the mood had shifted. The air was thick with unspoken threats. Ethan excused himself, needing to clear his head. He found a secluded alcove behind a curtain of living vines that served as a decorative partition. He leaned his head against the cool bioglass of the wall. Closing his eyes, voices drifted through the vines. "Stage 1 is ready," a deep voice growled. It was Varric. "Are the signatures in place?" Another voice asked. "Clipped. Military." "Yes." "The human tech residue is planted. When the charges blow, it will look like their own clumsy sabotage. And the timing? Now, before the dessert course. The Empress is too soft. She listens to Kalira's prattle about alliances. We need to remind the Empire that the only safety lies in dominance." Ethan's blood ran cold. It was a setup, a false flag. He pushed off the wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had to warn Reeves. He had to stop it. He burst through the vines back into the main hall. "Ambassador Reeves!" Ethan shouted, forgetting protocol, forgetting the hundreds of eyes that turned to him. "Get down!" Lord Varric turned, his face a mask of mock confusion. "What is the meaning of—" He didn't get to finish. The air above the human delegation shimmered, the decorative light motes, tiny floating orbs of bioluminescence that had been drifting harmlessly above the tables, suddenly stopped. They turned from a gentle yellow to a violent, pulsing red. Insect-like whirring filled the air. Before anyone could scream, the motes dove. They weren't lights. They were micro-drones. They slammed into the table in front of the human delegation and detonated. The explosion wasn't a fireball. It was a concussion wave of kinetic energy and plasma. The table disintegrated. Ambassador Reeves was thrown backward, his body limp, blood spraying across the pristine white floor. Ethan was lifted off his feet by the shockwave. He hit the ground hard, his ears ringing, the world reduced to a blur of smoke and screaming. He tried to scramble up, coughing as acrid smoke filled his lungs. He saw a second wave of drones hovering, aligning for a targeted strike directly at him. He had no weapon. He couldn't move fast enough. He braced himself for the end. A shadow swept over him. Something hard and warm slammed into him, tackling him to the ground. Kalira. She covered his body with hers, curling around him like a shield. She hissed, a primal sound of fury. Her armor flared with energy, generating a personal dampening field. The drones detonated against her back. The impact shuddered through her, driving the air from her lungs, but her armor held. Her bioluminescent markings were blindingly bright, flashing white-hot with pain and exertion. "Palace defenses," she roared, her voice cracking with strain. "Shields, now!" The hall erupted into chaos. Energy shields snapped into place around the throne. Guards poured in, weapons drawn. Kaelira rolled off Ethan, landing in a crouch, her fangs fully extended, her hands glowing with summoned plasma energy. She stood over him, panting, a predator guarding its kill. Ethan stared up at her, stunned. She had saved him. She was Dravari royalty, raised to view him as a bug, and she had used her own body to shield him from the blast. Across the room, the smoke began to clear. Varric stood amidst the wreckage, untouched. He pointed a finger at Ethan, his face twisted in a performance of righteous outrage. "Look!" Varric shouted, pointing to a hollow screen that had materialized above the debris. The data stream scrolling across it was unmistakable. Terran coding signatures. The humans brought weapons into the sacred hall. Varric bellowed. "They tried to assassinate the Empress. That soldier, Ethan Cole, he signaled the attack." The guards turned their staffs toward Ethan. The tips glowed with lethal violet light. "Seize him!" Varric ordered. "Wait!" Kaelira shouted, stepping between the guards and Ethan. She held up a hand, her palm glowing with royal authority. "Look at the blast pattern. It targeted them." "It was a failed suicide strike," Varric countered smoothly. "A clumsy attempt by primitives to decapitate our leadership." The Empress stood, her face unreadable. "Contain the human," she ordered. "We will determine the truth." Guards surged forward, grabbing Ethan by the arms, hauling him roughly to his feet. He didn't fight them. He knew it would be an immediate death sentence. He looked desperately at Kaelira. She was standing amidst the ruin of the banquet, her chest heaving. A thin line of violet blood trickled from a cut on her cheek where a piece of shrapnel had grazed her. Her silver eyes met his. The connection from the sphere was gone, but the memory of it lingered. She looked at him with a devastating conflict, the loyalty to her blood warring with the undeniable truth she had felt in his mind. She knew he was innocent, but she also knew that saying so right now, with the evidence burning on the screens, would look like treason. The guards dragged Ethan backward. The last thing he saw before the blast doors slammed shut was Kaelira, standing alone in the center of the hostile court, watching him with a look that was no longer predatory, but terrified. She had felt his soul, and now she was watching him be carried away to his execution. The interrogation chamber was not designed for comfort. It was a hollowed-out geode, a spherical room composed of faceted, semi-translucent crystal that hummed with a low-frequency vibration. Ethan hung suspended in the center, held not by chains, but by gravity fields that pinned his wrists and ankles to the empty air. A ring of Dravari inquisitors stood on a raised balcony that encircled the room. They adjusted controls on organic consoles that looked like exposed nerve clusters. "Prepare for memory extraction," a disembodied voice announced. The crystals flared. Ethan screamed, a sound that was ripped from his throat before he could stop it. It felt as though a hook had been inserted into the base of his skull and was dragging his subconscious out through his eyes. The room dissolved. The faceted walls became screens, projecting his memories in three-dimensional, high-fidelity holograms. Red dust, the taste of copper and recycled air. Ethan was back on Mars. The sky was a bruised purple. He was crouching behind a slag heap, his rifle hot in his hands. The audio was deafening, the distinctive thump-crack of railgun rounds impacting the earth. On the balcony, the Dravari Council watched. They saw Ethan firing and they saw him shouting orders. They saw the violence. See how he revels in it. Lord Varric's voice cut through the memory, distorted but audible. Look at the aggression. The human species is incapable of peace. They are biological weapons wrapped in skin. Ethan tried to fight the projection, but the machine dragged him deeper. The scene shifted. He was running now, lungs burning. He was carrying something heavy, a body, a child. The memory clarified. It was the Settlement 4 evacuation. Ethan wasn't attacking. He was covering the retreat. He was throwing himself into the line of fire, his armor taking sparks and shrapnel, while he dragged a civilian transport sled toward the bunker. Kalira stood at the edge of the observation balcony, her knuckles white as she gripped the railing. Her silver eyes tracked the phantom Ethan as he moved through the holographic firestorm. He is not hunting, she whispered to herself. The council saw a soldier shooting enemies. Kalira saw a man stepping between the wolf and the flock. She saw the terror in his eyes, not the thrill of the kill, but the desperate, suffocating fear of failing the people behind him. Increase the synaptic voltage, an inquisitor commanded. We need to see the programming. The trigger codes. No! Kalira snapped. She stepped forward, her voice ringing off the crystal walls. Stop. Varric turned to her, his lip curling. You have a stomach for war, cousin. Why does this disturb you? We are peeling back the layers of a spy. He is not a spy, Kalira said, her voice dropping to a dangerous chill. And you are not extracting truth. You are torturing a trauma victim to confirm your own bias. Look at his vitals. His cortisol is spiking. He is reliving fear, not malice. She slammed her hand down on the nearest console. The crystals dimmed. The projection of Mars flickered and died, leaving Ethan gasping in the center of the room, sweat dripping from his nose into the emptiness below. Enough, Kalira stated. If you break his mind, we lose the data. Even a butcher knows you do not dull the knife on a stone. Varric stared at her, measuring her defiance. Then he gestured to his aides. Bring up the telemetry from the banquet. A new hologram materialized. It was a forensic reconstruction of the drone attack. The data stream scrolled rapidly, Dravari glyphs mixed with jagged lines of code. Varric pointed a clawed finger at a specific cluster of red symbols. This is the guidance chip recovered from one of the drones, Varric announced, his voice booming for the benefit of the Empress, who sat silently in the shadows of the upper tier. It utilizes a polonium-based decay signature, primitive, messy, distinctly human. Ethan raised his head, fighting the nausea rolling through his gut. That is a lie, he croaked, his voice raspy. We use ion decay. Polonium was phased out 50 years ago. Silence. Prisoner, Varric roared. The evidence is irrefutable. The human delegation brought these weapons to assassinate the Empress and destabilize the Concord. To protect the Empire, we must execute the saboteur and sever all contact with Earth immediately. The chamber fell silent. The word execution hung in the air like a guillotine blade. The Empress leaned forward. Her face was veiled in shimmering light, but her voice was old and dry as parchment. The evidence is compelling, Lord Varric, the Empress said, but the human claims a frame-up. If we execute him and he is innocent, we start a war based on an error. If we let him live and he is guilty, we look weak. She paused, her gaze drifting down to Ethan, who hung limp in the gravity field. Princess Kalira, the Empress said, you were the one who requested the resonance test. You claim to know his mind. Take him to the holding spires. Interrogate him yourself. If you find proof of his guilt, you will execute him by your own hand at sunrise. Kalira stiffened. She knew what this was. It was a test of loyalty. As you command, Kalira said, bowing her head. The holding spires were not cells in the traditional sense. They were high-altitude chambers grown from translucent membrane, clinging to the side of the palace like barnacles on a whale. The view was a dizzying drop into the clouds of Varaxis Prime. Kalira shoved Ethan into the room. The gravity field released him, and he stumbled, catching himself against the wall. The wall recoiled at his touch, the living tissue shuddering before hardening again. Ethan turned, rubbing his wrists where the fields had dug in. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "For what?" Kalira paced the small room, her tail twitching, a sign of agitation he was beginning to recognize. "For buying you 12 hours of life? Do not thank me, human. I just volunteered to be your executioner." "Better you than Varric," Ethan said, leaning back against the breathing wall. "At least you will look me in the eye when you do it." Kalira stopped pacing. She turned on him, closing the distance in 2 long strides. She slammed her hand against the wall next to his head. The membrane rippled, curling around them to form a cocoon of privacy. She pressed close, pinning him with her presence. She was taller than him, powerful, terrifying. Her scent was overwhelming in the enclosed space, cinnamon and charged static. "Do not play games with me, Ethan Cole," she hissed. Her face was inches from his. He could see the intricate flecks of gold in her silver irises. He could feel the heat of her breath on his neck. "I saw your memories," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I saw you dragging that sled. I saw you bleeding for people who could not help themselves. That is not the mind of an assassin, but the data says you built those drones." "Explain it." "It is a setup," Ethan said, holding her gaze. He forced himself not to flinch as her claws dug into the wall near his ear. "Think about it. The drones bypassed your palace shields. Human tech cannot do that. Our frequencies are incompatible with your biofields." Kalira narrowed her eyes, studying his micro-expressions. She was looking for a lie. She found none. Only a Dravari command code could lower the localized shields. Ethan continued, his heart hammering as the proximity of her sharp, beautiful face made his thoughts race. Someone on the inside gave the order. Someone who wants the treaty to fail. Varric. Kalira breathed. "He has been talking about Stage 1 with his officers," Ethan said. "I heard him. He wants a war to justify expanding the fleet. If he kills me, Earth retaliates. If Earth retaliates, he gets his holy war." Kalira pulled back slightly, her expression darkening. "Varric controls the orbital defense grid," she murmured. "He has the codes, and he has been meeting with the deep space manufacturing guilds." She looked at Ethan, and for the first time, the mask of the arrogant princess slipped completely. "If he succeeds," she said, her voice stark, "he will burn your world to ash, and then he will turn on my mother. He views her as weak. He views me as compromised." "Compromised how?" Ethan asked. "Because I do not want to rule over a graveyard," she snapped. The door to the chamber chimed. A muffled voice came through the organic membrane. "Highness. Urgent communique from the Empress, encrypted channel." Kalira stepped back, tapping the comms node on her collar. The audio was isolated to her ear, but Ethan watched her face. He saw her eyes widen, then narrow into slits of cold fury. "Understood," she said tightly. She cut the connection and turned back to Ethan. "What happened?" he asked. "My mother," Kalira said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. She does not believe the evidence either, but she cannot publicly oppose Varric. He has too much support in the military. So what does she want? She wants me to transfer you to the secure isolation wing, Kalira said. She told me to keep you alive, but to make it look like I am breaking you. She is using me. She is using my reputation as a predator to buy herself political cover. And if Varric gets to me in the isolation wing? Ethan asked. He will, Kalira said. The isolation wing is staffed by his loyalists. You will suffer a cardiac event within the hour. They stood in silence for a moment. The red sun of Varaxis was setting outside the membrane wall, casting the room in a bloody gloom. I am not going to let you die. Ethan, Kalira said. It was the first time she had used his first name. It sounded strange on her tongue, accented and sharp. What are you going to do? Ethan asked. Kalira smirked, and her fangs glinted in the twilight. Something reckless. The transfer was supposed to be routine. 2 guards flanked them as they entered the grav lift, a vertical transport tube that relied on peristaltic contractions of the building itself to move passengers between levels. Kalira stood behind Ethan, her hand gripping his upper arm with bruising force. The guards, Varric's men, judging by their insignia, stood by the doors. Level 40, the guard muttered. Isolation wing. Kalira waited until the lift was in the dead zone between the spires and the lower foundations. She moved with a speed that Ethan couldn't even track. She didn't attack the guards. She attacked the panel. Her hand glowed with plasma, and she drove her fist into the control nerve cluster of the lift. The biological machinery screamed, a high-pitched shriek of pain from the living ship. The lights strobed red. The gravity dampeners failed instantly. The lift plummeted. The guards were thrown to the ceiling as the floor dropped out from under them. Ethan floated up, weightless, his stomach lurching into his throat. Kalira grabbed him. She wrapped one arm around his waist and used her free hand to claw into the wall of the lift, slowing their descent with a horrific screech of tearing metal and bone. "Hold your breath," she yelled. She kicked the emergency release lever. The doors blew outward. Wind roared. Debris swirled. They were falling past the maintenance levels, a blur of pipes and steam. Kalira hurled them out of the falling car. They hit a service gantry hard, rolling across the grated floor. The lift car continued its scream downward, disappearing into the dark abyss of the planet's crust. Alarms began to wail throughout the palace. Ethan groaned, sitting up. His shoulder throbbed. "What was that? That was your plan?" "It worked," Kalira panted, standing up and shaking debris from her hair. "Varric will think the lift failed. It buys us time." She grabbed his wrist, pulling him up. "Run, mammal. Unless you want to explain to the guards why you are not a smear on the basement floor." They ran. Kalira led him away from the polished halls of the upper palace, descending into the guts of the city. They took service tunnels that smelled of sulfur and rot. The walls here were not pearlescent bone. They were dark, calcified roots, covered in patches of bioluminescent moss. This was the Undercity, the forgotten foundation of Varaxis Prime. It was a labyrinth of abandoned biostructures and outlaw markets. Here, the gravity was erratic. One moment Ethan was running normally, the next, he felt light as a feather, bounding 10 feet with every step. He misjudged a jump over a steaming vent and floated too high, flailing his arms. Kalira snagged his ankle and yanked him back down. "Stop trying to fly," she scolded, though there was a hint of amusement in her voice. "You do not have the wingspan for it. I am trying not to fall into the acid pit," Ethan retorted, pointing to a bubbling pool of green sludge below the grate. "It is not acid," Kalira said, pulling him along. "It is waste recycling enzymes. It would digest you, but very slowly. It would be an embarrassing way to die." They ducked into a narrow alleyway crowded with strange hybrid creatures. outcasts from the surface. Drones with missing plating hovered buzzingly, selling illicit data shards. The air was thick with the smoke of narcotic fungi. Ethan brushed against a hanging vine, immediately. The vine curled around his arm, sticky and warm, tightening its grip. "Hey!" Ethan pulled, but the vine held fast, dragging him toward the wall where a large, pulsating flower waited. "A little help?" Kaelira stopped, looked back, and rolled her eyes. "It is a carrion vine," she said. "It thinks you are dead meat. Stop struggling. It triggers the digestion reflex." She walked back, unsheathed a small knife from her boot, and severed the vine with a casual flick of her wrist. The plant recoiled with a hiss. "You really are high maintenance," she muttered, sheathing the blade. "I am out of my element," Ethan said, wiping the sticky sap from his sleeve. "Put you in a Chicago rush hour and let us see how you do." "I would simply eat the cars that were in my way," Kaelira replied deadpan. They froze. Above them, on the upper gantry, a spotlight swept the alley. The heavy thrum of military-grade thrusters vibrated the air. "Varix hunters," Kaelira whispered. "Hunter-seeker drones. They are tracking your biosign." She looked around frantically. The alley was a dead end, blocked by a massive ventilation fan. To their left was a row of sealed maintenance pods, small egg-shaped capsules used for repairing the bioconduits. "In here," she hissed. She jammed her codes into the nearest pod. The hatch hissed open. It was tiny, barely big enough for one person, let alone two. Ethan hesitated. "Get in!" She shoved him. Ethan scrambled inside. Kaelira squeezed in after him. She hit the seal. The hatch slammed shut, plunging them into darkness. Outside, the roar of the hunter-seekers grew louder. The pod was suffocatingly small. Ethan was pressed back against the curved wall, his legs tangled with hers. Kaelira was forced to straddle his lap, her knees bracketed against his hips to fit. "Protocol initiate," a mechanical voice smoothed. Panic suppression activated. Vents hissed, releasing a cool blue mist into the capsule. It was a neuromist, designed to calm stressed engineers during dangerous repairs. It lowered heart rates and dulled fear. But for them, it did something else. The mist acted as a conductive medium for their earlier neural link. Ethan gasped as the connection slammed back into place. He felt her heart beating against his chest, but he also felt it in his mind, a frantic, double-time rhythm. He felt the adrenaline flooding her system. He felt the terrifying electric awareness of his own body pressed against hers. Kaelira shuddered. Her head dropped, her forehead resting against his clavicle. "The mist," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It amplifies." Every point of contact was fire. Her hands gripping his shoulders burned through his uniform. The rise and fall of her chest against his was an unbearable friction. Ethan looked up. The bioluminescence on her neck was going haywire, pulsing in rapid, erratic waves of violet and gold. It was beautiful. It was hypnotic. He couldn't look away. He felt her fear, not for herself, but for him. She was terrified that she had failed, that he was going to be dragged out and killed. And beneath the fear was something darker, hotter, a possessive anger, a primal instinct that screamed mine. Kaelira lifted her head. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown so large the silver iris was just a thin ring. She was breathing through her mouth, short, sharp breaths. The hunter-seekers were hovering right outside the pod. They could hear the hum of their scanners. Ethan didn't care. He was drowning in the feedback loop of their shared emotions. He looked at her lips, then up to her eyes, then down to the glowing tattoos. Kaelira's grip on his shoulders tightened. Her claws extended, pricking the fabric of his jacket. "Stop it," she growled. Her voice was unrecognizable, low, guttural, vibrating in her chest. "Stop what?" Ethan whispered. "Stop projecting that," she hissed. "Your desire, it is loud. I can't help it," he said. "You're in my head." She trembled, fighting a war within herself. The Dravari instincts were overwhelming her logic. The proximity, the danger, the neural link. It was tripping biological switches she had spent her life suppressing. She was the predator. He was the prey. But in this pod, in this mist, those lines were blurring into something chaotic. "Don't look at me like that," she warned. Her lips pulled back, revealing her fangs. They weren't smiling, and they were bared. "Like what?" Ethan asked, breathless. "Like you are not afraid of me," she said. Ethan looked at her. He saw the monster the galaxy feared, the fangs, the claws, the alien strength, and he felt the soul he had touched in the resonance sphere. The lonely, burdened protector. "I'm not afraid of you," he said softly. The admission snapped the last thread of her control. "One more look," she snarled, her face inches from his, eyes wild and desperate. "One more look and I'll bite you." It was a threat. It was a warning. It was a plea. Ethan didn't blink. He didn't look away. He leaned forward just a fraction of an inch. Kalira made a sound that was half sob, half growl. She buried her face in the junction of his neck and shoulder, and she bit him. It wasn't a nip. Her jaws clamped down on the trapezius muscle. Her fangs pierced the fabric of his uniform and sank into his flesh. Ethan cried out, his back arching, his hands gripping her waist instinctively. Pain exploded, white-hot and sharp, but immediately following the pain was a rush of endorphins, a chemical flood from her saliva that was distinct to her species. It numbed the wound and sent a jolt of liquid heat straight to his nervous system. It felt like being struck by lightning and wrapped in a blanket at the same time. She held the bite, her body shaking against his. In his mind, the connection flared to a blinding white peak. He felt a wave of absolute, unshakable certainty pour from her into him. Protection, claim, bound. The concepts didn't translate into English. They were ancient Dravari imperatives. The drone outside moved on. The hum faded. Kalira slowly released her grip. She pulled back, licking a drop of his red blood from her lip. Her eyes were hazy, dazed, the metallic silver swirling like mercury. Ethan slumped back against the pod wall, his hand flying to his shoulder. It was throbbing, a deep, rhythmic ache that synced with his heartbeat. "What?" He panted, his voice shaky. "What did you just do?" Kalira looked at the mark she had left, 2 puncture wounds soaking the shoulder of his uniform. She looked horrified and exhilaratingly calm at the same time. The pod hissed. The seal broke. The mist began to vent. Kalira scrambled backward, kicking the hatch open and falling out into the alleyway. She stood up, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, refusing to look at him. "Come," she said, her voice clipped, though it lacked its usual force. "The drones are gone. We need to move." Ethan climbed out, his legs feeling like jelly. He touched the wet spot on his shoulder again. It burned, but it wasn't unpleasant. It felt tethered. "Kalira," Ethan said, stepping toward her. She held up a hand. "Do not ask." "You bit me," Ethan said, a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in his chest. He was torn between indignation, the lingering shock of arousal, and sheer confusion. "I'm bleeding." "You were being loud," she muttered, adjusting her armor, still not meeting his eyes. "It was a tactical necessity to silence you." "Tactical necessity?" Ethan asked incredulously. "You sank your teeth into me." Kalira finally turned. Her bioluminescence was a steady, warm gold now. She looked at him with a strange new gravity. "You are alive," she said. "And now you belong to my tribe, for as long as I choose to keep you." She didn't explain that in Dravari culture. A non-lethal bite on the neck or shoulder was a declaration more binding than marriage. It was a notification to the pack. "This one is mine. Touch him, and I will rip your throat out." She turned on her heel and started walking down the dark corridor. "Keep up, soft shoulder," she called back, "or I will leave you for the vines." Ethan stood there for a second watching her go. He touched the bite again. He could still feel her in the back of his mind, a low, steady hum of awareness. He ran to catch up. The black market of the Undercity was a sensory assault. It smelled of ozone, fermenting fungus, and the sharp, metallic tang of alien blood. Neon script in a dozen galactic languages flickered overhead, casting the narrow, crowded streets in strobing pinks and greens. Kalira moved through the chaos with the confidence of a shark in a reef, her hood pulled low over her face. Ethan stuck close to her, his hand instinctively brushing the hilt of a stun baton he had liberated from a supply locker. The wound on his shoulder throbbed, a constant, heated reminder of the woman walking 2 steps ahead of him. "Stay close," Kalira murmured, her voice barely audible over the roar of the crowd. "And try to look less edible." "I'm trying," Ethan muttered, dodging a 6-armed merchant who was hawking what looked like severed cybernetic limbs. "But I stick out. Everyone here has scales or chitin." "You have skin," Kalira corrected. "It is exotic. In some sectors, soft skin is a delicacy. In others, it is a fetish. Try not to find out which one applies here." They turned down a narrow alleyway lined with data stalls. This was the domain of the info brokers. Kalira stopped in front of a booth run by a twitchy insectoid creature with multifaceted eyes that spun independently. "I need a trace on a batch of military-grade micro-drones," Kalira said, leaning over the counter. "Serial prefix X-ray Delta." The broker chittered, its mandibles clicking. "Restricted. Imperial Fleet Tech. Very dangerous to ask. Very expensive." Kalira slammed a heavy credit chit onto the counter. It was marked with the seal of a minor noble house. Stolen, Ethan assumed. "Trace it," she commanded. The broker snatched the chit and plugged a data spike into a console. Holographic lines of code scrolled across its eyes. "Manufacturing origin restricted." "Wait." The broker paused, its antennae vibrating. These were not made in the fleet yards. They came from a shadow site, off the books. "Where?" Ethan asked. The broker hesitated, then projected a star map. A small, jagged moon orbited a gas giant in the outer rim. "Hask 7, the broker hissed, "an old mining outpost, supposedly abandoned." "But the data packets from your drones pinged back to a server cluster there." Kalira stiffened. "Hask 7 is a graveyard. The atmosphere is toxic. There is nothing there but rust." "The data says otherwise," the broker said, closing the shop shutter. "Now go. If the fleet knows I tracked this, I will be scrap metal by morning." Getting off-world was the next problem. The Imperial spaceports were locked down tight, Varric's patrols scanning every ship. "We need a ride that does not ask questions," Kalira said as they navigated the sprawling, grimy docks of the Undercity. They found it in the Void Runner, a freighter that looked like it was held together by duct tape and prayers. The captain was a massive, hulking Dravari named Goran, missing one eye and half an ear. "I don't carry passengers," Goran grunted, blocking the boarding ramp, "especially not when the Royal Guard is tearing the sky apart looking for a human spy." "We are not spies," Kalira lied smoothly, stepping into the light but keeping her face partially obscured. "We are running from a debt collector, and we can pay double your usual rate." Goran squinted at them. A human and a Dravari? That's an odd pairing. What are you, partners? Bondmates, Kalira said without hesitating. She reached out and grabbed Ethan's hand, interlacing their fingers. The shock of her cold, scaled skin against his warm palm sent a jolt through him. Ethan blinked but didn't pull away. Yes. Bondmates. It's complicated. Her family doesn't approve. Goran laughed, a booming sound like rocks tumbling in a canyon. I bet they don't. A princess of the blood mixing with a dirtborn? That's a scandal waiting to happen. He looked at Kalira, his single eye narrowing. Wait. You have the royal markings. Stolen, Kalira said coolly. Body mod shop in Sector 4. I liked the aesthetic. Goran snorted. Ballsy. All right. 5,000 credits. You sleep in the cargo hold. And if we get boarded, you hide in the smuggling baffles. I'm not getting spaced for your romance. The cargo hold was cold, smelling of engine grease and freeze-dried rations. They sat on crates of illicit mining lasers, the hum of the Void Runner's engines vibrating through the floor plates. Bondmates? Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. It was the only lie he would believe, Kalira said, checking the charge on her stolen blaster. Interspecies bonding is rare, taboo, and usually desperate. It explains why we are hiding. So we're basically Romeo and Juliet in space, Ethan mused. I do not know who those are, Kalira said. But if they were foolish enough to fall in love across tribal lines, I assume they died. They did, Ethan admitted. See? Predictable. She sat back, the tension in her shoulders finally easing slightly. She looked at him, really looked at him, in the dim light of the hold. Tell me about your hive. Ethan. My hive? Your family? Your unit? Where do you come from? Ethan sighed, leaning his head back against a crate. No hive, just a crowded arcology in New Seattle. My parents were factory workers. Good people, but tired, always tired. They wanted me to be an engineer. Safe job, good pay. And you became a soldier, Kalira said. I wanted to see the stars, Ethan said with a bitter laugh. The recruiter told me the infantry was the best way to travel. He forgot to mention the stars are usually blocked by smoke and orbital bombardment. He looked at his hands. I sent money home. It was never enough. Then I got out, became a linguist, tried to be civilized. My fiancée. She left me, said I was too quiet, said I shouted in my sleep. She wanted a husband, not a ghost. Kalira was silent for a long time. I was bred in a tank, she said softly. Ethan looked at her in surprise. Genetic selection, she explained. The Empress chose the donor, the finest warrior in the fleet. I was designed to be perfect, stronger, faster, more lethal. My childhood was training, combat simulations, strategy, diplomacy. No playing? Ethan asked. Predators do play, Kalira said. But our play is practice for killing. I was always tested, always measured. If I failed a simulation, I was denied food. If I showed weakness, I was punished. I had to be the monster they needed to keep the Empire safe. She looked down at her claws. I have never been just Kalira. I have always been the heir, the weapon, the future. So we're both frauds, Ethan said gently. I'm a soldier pretending to be a diplomat, and you're a person pretending to be a weapon. Kalira looked up, her silver eyes shimmering. Maybe that is why you did not break in the resonance sphere, she whispered. You know what it is like to wear a mask that is too heavy. The ship lurched. The intercom crackled. Inspection patrol! Goran's voice boomed. Imperial Navy! Get in the baffles! Ethan and Kalira scrambled. The smuggling baffles were false wall panels behind the main cargo containers. They squeezed into the narrow gap, pulling the panel shut just as the airlock hissed open. It was tight, tighter than the pod. Ethan was pressed against the back wall. Kalira was pressed against him. There was nowhere to go. Her legs were tangled with his. Her chest was flush against his. Heavy boots clanged on the metal deck. "Manifest looks clean," a crisp Dravari voice said. "But we are scanning for biosigns. We have reports of fugitives." Ethan stopped breathing. The scanner beam, a blue grid of light, swept across the room. It would penetrate the baffles. "They will see 2 heat signatures," Ethan whispered, panic rising. Kalira's eyes darted around. Then they locked onto his. "Trust me," she breathed. She didn't wait for an answer. She moved. She shifted her weight, spinning so she was straddling his lap, her back to the panel. She grabbed his face with both hands, her claws digging into his scalp, and pulled his mouth down to hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. Her lips were cool, but her mouth was hot. She bit his lower lip, hard enough to draw blood, and Ethan gasped, his hands instinctively gripping her waist to steady himself. The scanner beam hit the panel. Inside the baffle, the heat signatures merged. "Scanning," the guard's voice said, sounding bored. "I'm reading. Wait. High heart rates. Elevated body temperature. Dopamine spike." He chuckled. "Looks like the crew is enjoying the downtime. Just a couple of deckhands blowing off steam." The guard banged on the panel with his rifle butt. "Keep it down in there. Save some energy for the shift." The footsteps receded. The airlock cycled shut. In the darkness of the baffle, neither of them moved. Kalira didn't pull away. Her forehead rested against his. Their breathing was ragged, synced in the tight space. Ethan's heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He could taste copper and the strange electric flavor of her skin on his tongue. "That was effective," Ethan whispered, his voice hoarse. "Camouflage," Kalira murmured, but she didn't let go of his face. Her thumb traced the line of his jaw. "Biological distraction." "Is that all it was?" Ethan asked. Kalira pulled back, her silver eyes searching his in the dark. She looked like she wanted to answer. She looked like she wanted to say something that would shatter the rest of her carefully constructed walls. "We should move," she said instead, her voice tight. "Before they come back." She scrambled out of the baffle, moving too fast, putting distance between them. Ethan followed, wiping the blood from his lip. He felt dizzy, and he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he wanted to do it again. Hask 7 was a nightmare of rust and shadow. The Void Runner dropped them off at a derelict docking spur on the dark side of the moon. The atmosphere was thin, breathable but tasting of iron filings. The gravity was low. Ethan and Kalira, clad in stolen maintenance armor, moved through the skeletal remains of a shipyard. Giant, half-finished hulls of cruisers loomed out of the fog like dead whales. "That is the facility," Kalira pointed. A sleek, black bunker was embedded in the crater wall. It didn't look abandoned. Active energy fields shimmered around the perimeter. "How do we get in?" Ethan asked. Kalira held up a data pad. "I still have the override codes for the Royal Logistics Network. Unless Varric has changed the encryption keys in the last 6 hours. We are authorized personnel." She keyed in a sequence. The massive blast doors groaned and slid open. They slipped inside. The facility was sterile, white, and humming with active servers. It wasn't a shipyard. It was a biolab. Rows of glass tanks lined the walls. Inside, drones were being assembled, not by machines, but by biological 3D printers weaving metal and flesh together. "This is tech heresy," Kalira whispered, disgusted. The Concorde bans biosynthetic fusion. They reached the central terminal. Ethan jacked in the data spike they had bought from the broker. The screen flooded with data. Ethan read the files, his blood running cold. "It's not just drones," he said, his voice trembling. "Look at the payload manifest." Kalira leaned over his shoulder. Her eyes scanned the alien text. "Project Ethelgard 2, she read. "Targeted genomic weapon, vector, viral, trigger, remote subspace signal." She scrolled down. "Target profile, Homo sapiens." Ethan felt sick. "It's a plague," he whispered. "Engineered to bond with human DNA. It's dormant until triggered. He's planning to infect Earth under the guise of aid. He'll send medical supplies or food. And once it's distributed..." He hits the switch. Kalira finished, her face pale. "And the entire human population dies in 48 hours. "Why?" Ethan asked, slamming his fist on the console. "Why go this far?" "Because he needs a monster," Kalira said, her voice hollow. "If humanity dies of a mysterious plague, the Empire looks like the savior trying to contain it. He frames the Concorde for negligence. He consolidates power. He becomes the emperor who protected the galaxy from the sick species." She looked at the tanks. "I used to think fear was necessary. I thought power was the only language the galaxy spoke. But this isn't power, this is cowardice." She looked at Ethan. "I am sorry. My bloodline. We are monsters." "You're not him," Ethan said firmly. "You're the one stopping him." The console suddenly flashed red. Intrusion detected. Lockdown initiated. Purge protocol active. A holographic face appeared on the main screen. It was a smooth, featureless avatar of light. "Solver 9, Kalira cursed. Varek's personal AI. Princess Kalira." The AI's voice was melodious and calm. "You are in violation of Imperial decree. Sanitizing sector." Turrets dropped from the ceiling. "Run!" Kalira shouted. She grabbed Ethan and shoved him toward the door just as the room erupted in laser fire. They sprinted down the corridor. The facility was waking up, turning against them. Blast doors began to slam shut, the floor panels electrified. Ethan vaulted over a closing barrier, sliding under the next one. Kalira was right behind him, firing her blaster over her shoulder, blowing apart a turret that was tracking them. The air was sucked out of the corridor as the venting system engaged. "Hold your breath," Ethan yelled. They scrambled through the airlock just as the inner door sealed. They tumbled out onto the lunar surface, gasping in the thin, iron-tasting air. The Void Runner was hovering above the spur. Its ramp lowered. "Jump!" Goran's voice roared over the comms. They ran across the gantry. The facility behind them exploded, a massive fireball of escaping gas and self-destructing munitions. The shockwave threw them forward. Ethan leaped. He caught the edge of the ramp with one hand, dangling over the abyss of the crater. Kalira landed beside him, her boots mag-locking to the metal. She reached down, grabbing his wrist. "I've got you," she yelled. She hauled him up with terrifying strength. They collapsed onto the deck of the ramp as the ship punched it, rocketing away from the moon. Safe in the cargo hold, the adrenaline crash hit them hard. Ethan lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, his chest heaving. He clutched the data spike in his hand like a lifeline. "We got it. We have the proof." Kalira sat beside him, leaning against the hull. She looked exhausted. Her bioluminescence was dim, flickering weakly. "We have the proof," she agreed quietly. "But now we have to go back." Ethan sat up. He looked at her. She was staring at her hands, trembling slightly. "What is it?" he asked. "If we go back," she said, not looking at him. "If I show this to the council, I destroy my family. Varek is my cousin, my mother." She let this happen. Her silence was permission. "You're saving your people from becoming mass murderers," Ethan said. "That's not destroying them. That's saving their soul." Kalira looked at him. Her eyes were filled with a vulnerability he had never seen before. "They will hate me for it," she whispered. "I won't," Ethan said. He reached out and touched her arm. She flinched, then relaxed. He moved his hand up to her shoulder, then to her neck, his thumb brushing the glowing tattoos. Kalira leaned into his touch. It was a small movement, but it spoke volumes. Ethan reached up and touched his own shoulder, where the bite mark was still tender under his shirt. "Does it still hurt?" she asked softly. "A little," he admitted. "But I like it. It reminds me I'm not alone." Kalira turned her head, pressing her cheek against his palm. "When we land," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "everything changes. I will be a traitor. You will be a witness. We will be enemies in the eyes of the court." "Then we have a few hours," Ethan said. "Let's not waste them." He leaned in. This time, it wasn't a distraction. It wasn't camouflage. He kissed her. It was gentle at first. A question. She answered with a desperate intensity, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. It was a kiss that tasted of survival, of fear, and of a longing that had been growing since the moment she first looked at him in the throne room. They sat together in the dark, hurtling through hyperspace, holding on to each other as if they were the only two solid things in a dissolving universe. They knew what was waiting for them at Varax's prime. Betrayal, war, perhaps death. But for now, in the quiet of the hold, the predator and the prey had found a truce that felt dangerously, wonderfully like love. The Void Runner dropped out of hyperspace expecting the quiet of the outer rim. Instead, it found a wall of weapons, the Obsidian Spear, a royal battleship 3 kilometers long and bristling with plasma batteries, filled the viewport. It was a predatory shadow against the crimson sun of Varax's prime, its bioscanners locking onto the tiny freighter instantly. Unidentified vessel, surrender or be vaporized. The comms officer's voice was not a request. It was a statement of physics. In the cockpit, Captain Goran slammed his fist onto the console. "I knew it!" he roared. "I knew picking up strays would get me killed." Kalira and Ethan stood behind him. Kalira's face was a mask of cold calculation, but Ethan felt the spike of fear through their residual link. "It is Varric," she said, staring at the battleship's signature. "He is commanding the blockade personally." "We have to run," Ethan said, though he knew it was impossible. "We cannot outrun a dreadnought." Goran snapped. He hit the surrender transponder. "I am sorry, kids, but I am not dying for your romance." Tractor beams, thick shimmering ribbons of green energy, lanced out from the spear, wrapping around the freighter and dragging it into the battleship's hangar bay like a spider reeling in a fly. Kalira turned to Ethan. "Listen to me," she said, grabbing his shoulders. "Whatever happens in there, do not speak. Do not fight. Let me handle Varric." "Kalira, promise me," she hissed, her eyes desperate. "If you fight, they will kill you instantly, I promise," Ethan said, though his stomach twisted. The freighter shuddered as it docked. The airlock blew open. Stormtroopers in heavy chitin armor poured in, weapons raised. Behind them strode Lord Varric. He looked triumphant, his golden eyes gleaming with malice. "Cousin?" Varric purred, stepping over the threshold. "You look rugged, and you have found your pet." He gestured to the guards. "Secure the princess. She has been clearly traumatized by her abduction, and shackle the human. He has much to answer for." The throne hall was packed. Every noble, every minister, every admiral in the system was present. The air smelled of fear and expensive perfume. Ethan was on his knees in the center of the obsidian floor. heavy magnetic cuffs binding his wrists behind his back. He had been beaten during the transfer. A bruised cheekbone and a split lip testified to the guard's enthusiasm. Kalyra stood a few feet away, flanked by royal guards. She had been cleaned up, forced back into her ceremonial armor, her hair braided in the complex knots of high station. She looked like a statue, remote, untouchable. Varric paced before the Empress's throne, projecting holograms of the data Ethan had stolen. But the context was twisted. "Behold, Majesty," Varric shouted, pointing to the scrolling code. "The human stole our fleet encryption keys. He accessed the HASC-7 facility to plant viruses, not to disable them. He was caught fleeing with the blueprints for our atmospheric processors." He turned to Ethan, sneering. "This man is not a diplomat. He is a saboteur sent by Earth to cripple our defenses before their invasion fleet arrives. And he used the princess, our heir, as a shield and a hostage to effect his escape." The court murmured, a sound like rising water. The Empress looked down from her dais. Her face was tired, the weight of the crown heavy on her brow. "Daughter," the Empress said, her voice echoing in the silent hall. "Is this true? Did the human force you to aid him?" Ethan looked up at Kalyra. He remembered the kiss in the cargo hold. He remembered the bite. He remembered the promise. "Let me handle Varric." Kalyra stepped forward. She did not look at Ethan. Her face was hard, her silver eyes devoid of warmth. "Yes, Majesty," she said clearly. Ethan felt the breath leave his lungs. "He manipulated me," Kalyra continued, her voice steady, projecting to the back of the room. "He used a neural mimicry device to simulate emotional resonance. He made me believe he was innocent. He played on my naivety." She turned slowly to look at Ethan. The gaze was ice. "He is a parasite," she said, her lip curling in disgust. "Weak, duplicitous, dangerous. I was a fool to trust a creature that cannot even retract its own claws." Ethan stared at her. He knew, intellectually, that this was a play. She was saving him from execution by painting him as a manipulator rather than a partner. But the words cut deeper than any knife. To be called a parasite by the woman who had claimed him. It shattered something inside him. He saw the triumph in Varric's eyes. "Then he is guilty," the Empress ruled. "Take him to the Meteor prison. Let Sovereign 9 extract the rest of his network." Kalyra bowed, a wise judgment. "Mother." Guards hauled Ethan to his feet. He didn't fight. He couldn't. He felt hollowed out. As they dragged him away, he looked back one last time. Kalyra was standing beside Varric, staring straight ahead, not acknowledging his existence. The Meteor prison was a hollowed-out asteroid caught in a geostationary orbit above the capital. It was a black, jagged rock spinning in the void, its interior a honeycomb of cells grown from lightless biocrystal. Ethan's cell was a sphere of smooth, gray stone. There were no windows, no furniture, just the constant, rhythmic thrum of a sonic dampener that made his teeth ache. Every hour, the walls would glow, and SOVR-9's avatar would appear. "Confess." The AI's voice soothed. It projected holograms of Kalyra, not the cold princess in the throne room, but the woman in the maintenance pod, the woman in the cargo hold. It replayed their kiss, twisting the audio, layering in analysis tracks that labeled his heart rate as deceptive and his movements as predatory. "See?" the AI whispered. "You were hunting her. You identified a high-value target and engaged mating protocols to secure access. Admit it. It is efficient. We admire the strategy." "I didn't." Ethan croaked. He was dehydrated, exhausted. It wasn't a strategy. The sonic pulse hit him, a wave of nausea that knocked him to the floor. Retching dryly, Incorrect response, the AI said. We will try again in cycle 4. Ethan curled into a ball on the cold floor. He closed his eyes, but all he could see was Kaylara's face as she called him a parasite. He touched his shoulder. The bite mark was still there, a raised scar under his uniform. It felt like a brand now. A lie. In her chambers. Kaylara ripped the ceremonial armor from her body and threw it across the room. The chest plate clattered against the wall, cracking the decorative plaster. She sank to her knees, her breathing ragged, weak, duplicitous, parasite. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. She had saved his life. She knew that. If she had defended him, Varric would have executed them both for treason right there on the floor by disavowing him. She had bought him time. But she had seen his eyes. She had seen the light go out in them. She had broken the one thing he had given her freely. His trust. Am I any different? She whispered to the empty room. My grandmother executed her mate to secure a trade route. My father exiled his brother to prevent a coup. Is this just what we do? Is betrayal genetic? She looked at her reflection in the bioglass mirror. The glowing tattoos on her neck were dim, pulsing a sickly gray. No. She stood up. She went to a hidden panel in the floor, a relic from the days when the palace was a fortress, not a court. Beneath it lay a cache of old gear, not Royal Guard issue, Shadow Ops tech. She pulled out a small jar of biogel. It was a resonance conductor, illegal, dangerous. She smeared a small amount on her temple. Then she activated the ancient pneumatic tubes that ran through the palace foundations, bypassing the digital networks Varric monitored. She sent a physical capsule, a small organic drone, shooting through the miles of vacuum piping toward the orbital tether. In his cell, Ethan heard a soft thump. A small panel in the floor, usually for waste disposal, slid open. A tiny drone scuttled out. It looked like a mechanical beetle. It stopped in front of him and dissolved into a puddle of goo. Ethan stared at it. Then, a voice spoke in his head, not through his ears, but vibrating directly in his skull. Ethan. He flinched. Kaylira, do not speak. Her thought voice was strained, static-filled. Think. The gel creates a bridge. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. Anger flared hot and bright. Go to hell. Or are you here to call me a parasite again? I had to, she pleaded. Varric had the execution order signed. If I stood with you, we would both be dead. So you destroyed me instead. Ethan projected back. You stood there and watched them drag me away. You made me look like a monster. I made you look like a victim of your own programming, she countered. It bought you time. Ethan, please. I am not your enemy. Aren't you? Ethan slammed his fist against the stone floor. You're a Dravari. You survive. That's what you do. You bite. You lie. You win. I am trying to win for us. Kaylira's mental shout was so loud it made him wince. Listen to me. Varric is launching the fleet in 12 hours. He is not waiting for the trial. He is going to jump to Earth sector and release the virus. Ethan went cold. The anger evaporated, replaced by dread. 12 hours? Yes. I have a plan. But I need you to trust me one last time. Trust you? Ethan laughed bitterly in the dark. Why should I? I'm just a soft-shouldered mammal. A tool. There was a long silence. Then, the sensation shifted. Kaylira wasn't projecting words anymore. She was projecting herself in her chambers. Kaylira had stripped down to her underlayer. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes closed. She lowered her mental shields completely. She let him see the guilt. It wasn't a word. It was a physical weight in her chest. She She let him feel the self-loathing, the terror that she was becoming exactly like Varric. She let him feel the memory of the bite, not as a claim of ownership, but as a desperate attempt to anchor herself to something real. And then she showed him her scars, not the physical ones, but the mental ones, the loneliness of the throne, the coldness of a life without touch. "I am not a monster," she projected, her mental voice breaking. "I am just a woman who is terrified of losing the only person who ever saw her." Ethan sat in his cell, tears leaking from his eyes. He felt it all. It washed over him, dissolving the resentment. He unclenched his hands. He focused on his own feelings, the fear, the exhaustion, and the deep, aching longing that wouldn't go away no matter how much he tried to hate her. "I'm still here," he projected back softly, the bite. "It burns. But I haven't tried to remove it." He felt her relief. It was like a warm tide. "Okay," she whispered. "Here is the plan. The plan. Phase 1. Kaelira stood on the flight deck of the Obsidian Spear. The wind whipped her hair. Varric stood beside her, watching the squadron of starfighters running drills in the atmosphere. "You seem recovered, cousin," Varric noted, eyeing her. "I have had time to reflect," Kaelira said smoothly. "You were right. The human was a distraction, a weakness. I have purged it." "Good," Varric said, "because I need you. The fleet respects your bloodline. Stand with me when we jump to Earth. Let them see the heir united with the High Commander." "I will do more than stand with you," Kaelira said. "I will lead the vanguard." Varric raised an eyebrow. "You wish to fly?" "I wish to prove my loyalty," she said. "Let me lead the fighter screen. Let me be the first to burn their defense grid." Varric smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Very well. Take the lead. But know that if you deviate from the flight path, I will vaporize you myself. I would expect nothing less." She climbed into the cockpit of her personal interceptor, a sleek, needle-nosed craft named the Void Razor. As the canopy closed, her fingers flew across the console. She wasn't prepping weapons. She was uploading a subroutine. The virus she and Ethan had crafted on Hask 7 was complex, but she didn't need to infect the whole fleet yet. She just needed to infect the communication relay. She launched. The G-force pressed her into the seat. She soared into the formation, her voice calm over the comm. "All wings, form up, preparing for jump vector calculation." She triggered the upload. Hidden in the burst of telemetry data she sent to the other ships was a logic bomb. It wouldn't shut them down. It would just delay them. It would create a millisecond lag in their targeting computers. Just enough to create chaos. The plan. Phase 2. Ethan stared at the ventilation grate in the ceiling of his cell. Kaelira's blueprints, beamed directly into his visual cortex via the neural link, glowed in his mind's eye. "The prison is old," she had told him. "The meteor was mined before it was a jail. There are maintenance shafts that the AI doesn't monitor because they are too small for a Dravari guard, but not too small for a human." Ethan waited for the sonic pulse. 3, 2, 1. The pulse hit. He gritted his teeth, riding the wave of nausea. As the pulse faded, the sensors rebooted for exactly 3 seconds. Ethan moved. He didn't have tools. He had desperation. He leaped, grabbing the grate. It was magnetic. He used the buckle of his heavy belt, the only metal he had, to short the lock. Sparks showered him. The grate popped loose. He hauled himself up into the shaft just as the lights in the cell flared back to life. He was in a narrow, dusty tunnel. It smelled of stale air and rock dust. He crawled. His knees scraped raw on the stone. He had to navigate a maze of tunnels, avoiding the vibration sensors. Left at the junction. Kaelira's voice guided him. There is a heat exchanger ahead. Wait for it to cycle or you will be cooked. He waited, sweat pouring down his face as the pipe in front of him glowed cherry red, then faded to gray. He scrambled past. He reached the hangar bay. Guards were patrolling the catwalks. Ethan dropped from the vent, landing silently behind a stack of crates. He needed a ship, not just any ship. The prison shuttle. He saw it, a blocky, armored transport. 2 guards stood at the ramp. Ethan didn't have a weapon. He looked around. He saw a fire suppression canister. I promised not to be a monster, he thought. He grabbed the canister and hurled it, not at the guards, but at the far wall. It clanged loudly. The guards turned, weapons raised. What was that? One of them moved to investigate. Ethan moved on the second one. He didn't use a knife. He used a sleeper hold he had learned in basic training. He wrapped his arm around the guard's neck, pinching the carotid artery. The Dravari thrashed, claws scrabbling at Ethan's arm, tearing the sleeve, scratching skin. Go to sleep, Ethan grunted, holding on. Just sleep. The guard slumped. Ethan dragged him into the shadows. He didn't kill him. He checked the pulse. Steady. He sprinted for the shuttle. He punched the override code Kalyra had given him into the keypad. The ramp hissed open. Alarm klaxons began to blare. SOV-R9 had found him. Prisoner escape in Sector 4. Lethal force authorized. Ethan dived into the pilot's seat. He fired the engines. The shuttle lurched, tearing the docking clamps loose. Turrets spun to face him. Green plasma bolts slammed into the hull, shields holding at 40%. The computer screamed. Ethan slammed the throttle forward. The shuttle shot out of the hangar, tumbling into the void. He was free. The rendezvous. Kalyra saw the explosion on the prison rock from her cockpit. He is out, she thought, a fierce joy surging through her. She keyed her comms. Lord Varric, sensors detect a debris malfunction at the prison. Ignore it. Varric ordered from the flagship. We are initiating the jump sequence. Align your vector. I am aligned, Kalyra said. She watched the countdown. She looked at the tactical map. The shuttle, a tiny, insignificant dot, was racing toward the shadow of the moon where the obsidian spear couldn't target it. She had to keep Varric's eyes on her. She broke formation. She rolled her interceptor, diving directly across the bow of the flagship. Princess! What are you doing? The flight controller screamed. Testing the reflexes of the fleet. Kalyra laughed, her voice wild. If you cannot track one fighter, how will you track the Terran defense drones? She danced through the formation, weaving between the massive cruisers. It was reckless. It was beautiful. It distracted every sensor operator in the fleet. By the time Varric ordered her to fall back in line, Ethan's shuttle had vanished into the dark side of the moon's gravity well. Kalyra pulled her ship back into position. I have you, she thought, sending the feeling out into the void. I'm safe, came the faint, exhausted reply, waiting for the signal. Kalyra landed her fighter in the obsidian spear's main hangar. She climbed out, her helmet under her arm. Varric was waiting for her on the bridge. You fly like a maniac, he said, though he looked impressed. I fly like a Dravari, she corrected. She stood beside him as the stars began to stretch. The fleet was jumping. Not to Earth, not yet, to the staging point. Kalyra looked at the view screen. She was standing at the right hand of the devil. She had his trust. She had his codes. And she had a partner hiding in the dark, ready to strike. Jump, Varric commanded. The stars turned to streaks of light. Kalyra took a deep breath. The game was entering the final round, and for the first time in the history of her family, she wasn't playing for power. She was playing for love. The Dravari armada moved through the void like a school of apex predators scenting blood in the water. 300 warships, their hulls grown from black, radar-absorbing chitin and reinforced with living bone, flew in a tight, aggressive formation. They did not burn fuel in the crude human sense. They fed on zero-point energy, their massive engines rippling with a bioluminescent violet glow that trailed behind them like the tails of deep-sea leviathans. At the center of the formation sat the obsidian spear, the flagship, a monstrosity of war that was larger than most human cities. To the casual observer, or the panicked sensor arrays of the border colonies, this was a security exercise, a display of might. But the destination coordinates locked into the navigation computers told a different story. They were heading for the Nexus Gate, an ancient, stabilized wormhole that served as the primary artery between the Dravari sector and the Terran frontier. Once they crossed that threshold, they would be positioned directly above Earth's major arcologies. The payload, the horrific DNA-targeted bioweapon Varric had cultivated, was already primed in the launch tubes, disguised as humanitarian aid canisters. Ethan Cole watched the tactical plot on a flickering holotable, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the resistance display. He was standing on the bridge of the Void Runner, which was currently docked magnetically to the underside of a massive asteroid in the debris field trailing the Armada. The room was crowded, hot, and smelled of stale coffee and high-grade starship lubricant. "This is suicide," Captain Vance said, crossing his arms. Vance was the leader of the human covert ops team, Terran Black Watch. He was a block of a man, scarred and cynical, wearing stealth armor that seemed to absorb the light around him. He looked at the tactical map, then at Ethan, and finally at the holographic image of Princess Kaylira. "You want us to synchronize our insertion with a signal from her?" Vance spat the word "her" like it was poison. "She is the one who stood in the throne hall and called you a parasite, Cole. She is the one who handed you over to the torture bots." "It was a cover," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion dragging at his bones. "She had to buy time. She bought time by selling you out," Vance countered. "And now you want my team to infiltrate the flagship based on her codes. If she is playing us, we are dead before the airlock cycles." Ethan looked around the room. It wasn't just humans. There were 3 Dravari officers, loyalists to the Empress who had been purged from the main fleet roster by Varric. They looked uncomfortable standing so close to the humans, their tails twitching with suppressed instinct. And there was Goran, the one-eyed pirate captain leaning back in his pilot's chair with a grin that suggested he found the imminent prospect of death mildly amusing. "Look, the princess pays well," Goran rumbled, picking his teeth with a sliver of metal. "And she got the kid out of the meteor prison. That counts for something. It counts that she likes her pets." Vance snapped. "It doesn't mean she won't put us down when it is convenient." Ethan slammed his hand onto the holotable. The image flickered. "Look at the data!" Ethan shouted. He brought up the files they had stolen from HASC-7, the bioweapon schematics, the projection model showing a 90% mortality rate for Earth within 48 hours. "This isn't about politics anymore," Ethan said, his voice dropping to a rough timbre. "It is not about whether you like her or trust me, it is about that." He pointed to the simulation of Earth turning a sickly, necrotic gray. "Varric isn't just going to kill soldiers. He is going to wipe out families. He is going to erase a species to secure his throne. Kaylira is the only person on that ship who can lower the internal containment fields. Without her access, we can't get to the core. Without the core, we can't stop the launch." Vance stared at the simulation. The muscle in his jaw jumped. "One chance," Vance muttered. "If the codes are fake, I am shooting you first, Cole. Then I am shooting the alien." "Fair enough," Ethan said. He looked at the loyalist Dravari officers. Are the stealth shuttles prepped? The lead officer, a female with emerald scales, nodded once. The signature dampeners are active. We can latch onto the obsidian spear's hull near the waste heat exhaust. It is a blind spot. Then let's move, Ethan said. We have an appointment with the future of the galaxy, on the bridge of the obsidian spear. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and absolute power. Lord Varric stood at the viewport, watching the stars stretch and blur as the fleet prepared for the final micro-jump to the Nexus gate. He looked like a god of war, his golden armor gleaming, his hands clasped behind his back. We are on schedule, High Commander. An admiral reported from the sensory pit below. Excellent, Varric purred. And the payload? Primed. The aid canisters are loaded into the forward tubes. Varric smiled. It was a terrible thing to witness. Princess Kaelira stood 3 paces behind him. She forced her breathing to remain even, her heart rate slow. She was walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. Cousin, she said, her voice smooth, projecting a bored arrogance. I have been reviewing the defensive grid for the arrival. Varric turned, one eyebrow arched. Oh? And do you find my strategies lacking? Not lacking, she said, stepping forward to the tactical display. Conservative. You have the destroyer squadrons flying tight escort. It is safe, yes. But it leaves our flanks slow to react if the Terran orbital defenses are more robust than we anticipate. She tapped the screen, moving the holographic icons of the destroyers further out, thinning the defensive line around the flagship. If we widen the net, she argued, we can intercept their drone swarms before they even reach weapon range. It projects dominance. It shows we are not afraid of their toys. Varric studied the map. He was a brilliant tactician, but his ego was his blind spot. He wanted to look invincible. It is aggressive, Varric admitted. It is Dravari, Kaelira countered. Varric nodded slowly. Adjust the formation. Move the destroyers to the outer perimeter. Kaelira bowed her head to hide the flash of relief in her eyes. By moving the destroyers out, she had just stripped the flagship of its close-range support. She had created a corridor. And the internal sensors? Kaelira asked. I noticed Asavar 9 is running deep scan diagnostics on the crew quarters. It is drawing power from the main drive. I am rooting out spies, Varric said, his eyes narrowing. Of course, Kaelira said. But surely, during the jump, we need maximum power to the stabilizers. If the drive fluctuates while we are in the Nexus, the ship could be torn apart. Perhaps we should suspend the internal scans until we clear the gate. Varric hesitated. He looked at the power distribution charts. Pause the internal scans, Varric ordered the comms officer. Reroute power to the stabilizers. We will resume the purge once we are in Earth orbit. Kaelira let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She had just blinded the ship's internal security system. She looked out at the stars. Come on. Ethan, she thought, projecting the sentiment into the void. I have opened the door. Walk through it. The stealth shuttle hit the hull of the obsidian spear with a metallic clang that vibrated through the floor plates. Magnetic clamps engaged. We are attached, Goran whispered over the comms. Hull breach in 3, 2, 1. The plasma torch cut a perfect circle in the freighter's thick armor. The plug of metal fell inward, caught by a gravity field before it could clamber to the floor. Ethan dropped into the maintenance shaft, his stun baton in hand. Vance and his team followed, moving like ghosts in their stealth armor. The shaft was hot, lined with pulsating bioconduits that carried the ship's lifeblood, nutrient slurry for the organic components and plasma for the engines. Split up, Ethan whispered. Vance, take your team to the server core. You have the virus. And you? Vance asked. I have a distraction to arrange, Ethan said. He checked his wrist comp. The coordinates Kalira had sent him led to a secondary maintenance chamber near the officers' mess. Ethan moved through the ship. He knew the layout not because he had studied it, but because Kalira was feeding him the path in real time. He felt her presence in the back of his mind, a warm, guiding hum. Left, down the ladder, wait for the patrol to pass. He reached the maintenance chamber. The door hissed open. He stepped inside. The room was dimly lit by the blue glow of a massive viewport that looked out over the rear of the ship, watching the armada trailing behind them. Kalira was there. She was pacing, her hands clenched into fists. When the door opened, she spun around, her hand going to the plasma dagger at her hip before she recognized him. Ethan. She breathed his name like a prayer. Ethan stood there for a second, looking at her. She was wearing the uniform of the enemy. She looked regal, terrifying, and exhausted. Kalira crossed the room in 2 strides. She didn't hug him. She stopped a foot away, searching his face, scanning him for injuries. You look terrible, she said, her voice trembling. You look like a traitor, he replied. But there was no heat in the words. I had to, she whispered, in the throne hall. I had to break you to save you, I know, Ethan said. He took a step closer. But you didn't have to be so convincing. Parasite? Really? I was improvising. She defended, though her eyes were wet. I needed them to believe I despised you. They believe it, Ethan said. He reached out. He didn't know if he should, but the pull between them was physical, magnetic. He took her hand. Her skin was cool, her claws slightly extended. I hated you for about an hour, Ethan admitted quietly. In that cell. I thought everything in the pod was a lie. I thought I was just another asset you had used up. Kalira flinched. She pulled her hand away and ripped the collar of her uniform down, exposing her neck and shoulder. Look, she commanded. Ethan looked. Her skin was flawless, glowing with the intricate bioluminescence of her station. But there, just above the clavicle, was a faint silver scar. It wasn't a bite mark. It was a burn. What is that? Ethan asked. A vow, she said. I branded myself after the banquet, when I realized I was falling for you. She looked him in the eye, her gaze fierce and unyielding. The bite I gave you, it was not a punishment. It was not a tactic. It was a promise. In my culture, we do not give our marks lightly. It means I am bound to you. It means if you bleed, I bleed. Ethan felt the world tilt. He reached up and touched the spot on his own shoulder, where the teeth marks were still tender under his tactical vest. He stepped forward, closing the gap. He cupped her face in his hands. Her skin felt electric against his palms. I never stopped feeling it, he whispered, even in the cell. It burned. It was the only thing that kept me sane. It made me feel seen. Seen, she asked, her voice cracking. Claimed, Ethan corrected, for who I really am. Not the soldier, not the diplomat, just me. Kalira let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. She surged forward. This wasn't the desperate, confused kiss in the cargo hold. This was a collision of souls. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down, her body pressing against his with a desperation that bordered on pain. Ethan held her tight, his hands tangled in the complex braids of her hair, anchoring her. It was a surrender. For a moment, the war didn't exist. The armada didn't exist. There was only the heat of her, the scent of cinnamon and static, and the overwhelming relief of being back in the gravity of the only person who understood the weight they both carried. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads resting against each other. "We have to stop him," Kalira whispered against his lips. "We will," Ethan said. "But what comes after?" she asked, pulling back slightly to look at him. "Even if we win, I am an exile. You are a traitor to your command structure. We have nowhere to go." "Then we go somewhere new," Ethan said firmly. He ran his thumb over the silver brand on her shoulder. "We build something new. People say your kind are monsters. People say my kind are weak. We prove them wrong." "We defy them?" she asked. "We change the definition," Ethan said. "You can be fierce without being cruel. Kalira, you can be a queen without being a tyrant. Love isn't about erasing who you are. It is about choosing what you do with your teeth." She stared at him, her metallic eyes wide. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face, sharp, dangerous, and devastatingly beautiful. "Choose what I do with my teeth," she repeated, a low purr vibrating in her chest. "I like that." She straightened up, smoothing her uniform. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a cold, steely resolve. But the connection between them remained, a humming tether of gold and silver light in their minds. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready," Ethan said. The operation, Kalira swept into the officers' mess, her cape billowing behind her. The room was full of high-ranking captains and tactical officers taking their rotation break. "Attention!" she barked. The room snapped to attention. Chairs scraped. Salutes were thrown. "Highness!" a captain stammered. "At ease," Kalira said, walking to the front of the room. "I have summoned you for a victory briefing. Lord Varric believes we should coordinate our ground assault protocols before we exit the Nexus." She activated the holographic display wall. "I want to review the drop zone assignments for the 3rd Legion," she said. "It seems inefficient." While Kalira drew the eyes of the ship's command structure to a meaningless map, Ethan was moving. He met up with Vance and the team outside the central server core. "The door is DNA locked," Vance whispered. Ethan held up a small vial. It contained a sample of saliva Kalira had given him in the maintenance room. He poured it onto the sensor. The sensor flashed green. Royal genetic marker confirmed. "Access granted." "Too easy," Goran muttered over the comms. "I don't like it." They slipped inside. The server core was a forest of crystalline columns, pulsing with data. Vance moved to the central interface. "Plant the virus." The tech specialist jacked in. "Uploading. 20%. Ethan stood guard at the door, his stun baton humming. He could feel Kalira in his head. She was stalling. She was arguing about atmospheric entry vectors, drawing out every sentence to buy them seconds. 50%. Vance hissed. Suddenly, the red alert klaxons began to scream. The lights in the server room turned a violent crimson. "Anomaly detected." The voice of Sovereign 9 boomed. Not smooth this time, but jagged and angry. "Unauthorized biosignatures in core. Lockdown initiated." "We're blown!" Vance shouted. The door slammed shut. Then, gravity went crazy. Sovereign 9 rotated the artificial gravity plates in the room 90 degrees. Ethan fell. He didn't fall down. He fell sideways, slamming into the wall, which was now the floor. Vance and the team tumbled past him, sliding down the sleek metal surface toward the ventilation fans. "Mag boots!" Ethan yelled, activating the magnetic soles of his stolen armor. He stuck to the wall with a metallic clank. Drones dropped from the ceiling, which was now the left wall. They were spider-like, armed with laser cutters. "Fire!" Vance roared, hanging by one hand from a server rack. Ethan drew his stun pistol. He fired. blue bolts of energy smashing into the drones. "Kaylira," Ethan projected. "They know! I know!" Her voice came back, sharp with exertion. Varric saw the power spike. "I am coming to you." The door to the server room, now located on the ceiling, blasted open. Kaylira dropped through. She landed on the wall beside Ethan, her claws digging into the metal to anchor herself against the twisted gravity. She was a blur of motion. She drew her plasma sword, a blade of crackling white energy. A security droid lunged at Ethan. Kaylira intercepted it. She severed its head with a single, fluid strike, then kicked the chassis down into the fan blades. "Keep uploading," she shouted at the humans. "We're at 80%, Vance yelled, returning fire at a squad of guards that had appeared in the doorway. The gravity shifted again, this time inverting completely. Everyone fell toward the ceiling. Ethan grabbed a conduit pipe. Kaylira grabbed Ethan's belt. They swung together, hanging in the air as laser fire zipped past them. They moved in perfect sync. Ethan fired blindly over his shoulder, covering her. Kaylira used the momentum of the swing to launch herself at a guard who had magnetic boots, tackling him and throwing him into the far wall. It was a dance, a violent, chaotic ballet born of the neural link. Ethan didn't need to see where she was, he felt her. He ducked before she swung her sword. She stepped aside before he fired. 99%, the tech screamed. "Done!" The screens in the room and all over the ship flickered. The virus took hold. Instead of the tactical map, every screen on the obsidian spear suddenly broadcast a recording. It was the recording Ethan and Kaylira had stolen from Hask 7. It was Varric's voice, clear and cold. "Infect Earth under the guise of aid shipments. Frame the Concord, trigger the genocide." The fighting in the doorway stopped. The guards lowered their weapons, staring at the screens. They were hearing their high commander admit to treason against the code of honor. "What is this?" a guard whispered. "Truth," Kaylira said, dropping to the floor as gravity stabilized. She looked at the guards. "Your commander is a butcher. He would make you murderers of children. Stand down." The guards hesitated. They looked at Kaylira, the air, glowing with royal fury, and then at the screens. They lowered their rifles. The command dome. Varric stood in the center of the bridge. He watched the virus spread across his screens. He watched his own words damning him. He didn't panic. He went very, very still. He looked at the tactical map. The virus was locking out the weapon tubes. The bioweapon was neutralized, but the fleet was still moving. "Traitors," Varric whispered. He walked to the central pedestal. This was the manual override for the Nexus gate. It was hardwired. It couldn't be hacked. He punched in a sequence. Blast doors slammed down over the bridge entrance, sealing him inside with his bridge crew. He activated the comms, broadcasting to the entire ship. "Princess Kaylira has betrayed the Empire. She has been corrupted by the human spy. They have fabricated this evidence to sow discord." He turned the key on the pedestal. "The Nexus gate control locked. I am locking the gate coordinates," Varric announced. "The fleet will jump, and if I cannot use the bioweapon, I will use the ships themselves. We will ram the Terran cities. We will burn them with engine wash." He looked at the blast doors, knowing Kaylira was on the other side. "Come and get me, cousin. But you are too late." Outside the blast doors, Kaylira and Ethan stood side by side. The hallway was littered with disabled drones. "The doors are neutron shielded," Kaylira said, breathing hard. "My plasma blade cannot cut them." Ethan looked at the panel. "We can't cut them, but we can blow them." He looked at Vance. "Do you have any breaching charges left?" Vance grinned, a bloody, terrifying expression. "I saved the big one for a special occasion." Kaylira looked at Ethan, Her eyes were wild, her blood up. "If we go in there," she said, "it is a death match. By ancient law, if I challenge him in the command dome, no one can interfere. It will be him or me." Ethan took her hand. He squeezed it, feeling the pulse of her strength. "Then make sure it's him," he said. Vance planted the charge. "Fire in the hole!" The explosion rocked the ship. The blast doors groaned and buckled. Kaylira didn't wait for the smoke to clear. She stepped through the breach. Her sword ignited, her fangs bared, walking into the fire to claim her throne. Ethan followed, his weapon raised, ready to defy an empire to keep his promise. The smoke from the breaching charge swirled in the heavy air of the command dome, smelling of scorched metal and ozone. Through the haze, the massive viewport dominated the room, filled not with stars but with the violent, churning violet vortex of the Nexus Gate. The energy was unstable, crackling against the ship's shields, casting erratic shadows that danced across the floor like restless ghosts. Lord Varric stood on the central dais, silhouetted against the swirling chaos. He did not look like a cornered man. He looked like a king waiting for his coronation. As Kaylira stepped through the ruined blast doors, her plasma blade humming a lethal white note, Varric spread his arms. "You enter with a weapon drawn, cousin." Varric boomed, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "You bring a human soldier into the heart of Dravari power. You confirm every accusation I have made." "I come to end your madness," Kaylira said, her voice low and dangerous. "Stand down. Varric, the fleet knows the truth. Your confession is playing on every screen from here to the rim." Varric laughed. It was a cold, jagged sound. "They hear a recording, but they see you. They see the air threatening the High Commander with an alien at her side. They see weakness." He reached up and unclasped his heavy ceremonial cloak, letting it fall to the deck. Underneath, his black bioarmor was fully active, the living plates shifting and hardening. "I invoke the Kalvash," Varric roared. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Ethan, stepping in behind Kaylira with his rifle raised, felt the shift in tension. He didn't know the word, but he felt the weight of it through the neural link. It was ancient. It was absolute. "The right of blood," Kaylira whispered. Varric turned to the surveillance drones hovering in the corners of the room. He addressed them, knowing the feed was being broadcast to the Empress, the admirals, and every crew member in the Armada. "I challenge the fitness of the air," Varric declared. "She is compromised. She is ruled by alien sentiment, by the law of the First Dynasty. I demand trial by combat. Winner takes the fleet. Winner takes the throne." He ignited his own weapon, a heavy double-ended glaive that crackled with red energy. Kaylira stiffened. She looked at Ethan. "He has invoked the law," she said, her voice tight. "If I refuse, I forfeit my claim. The fleet will follow him by default. Then we fight him together," Ethan said, stepping forward. "No!" Kaylira snapped, throwing her arm out to stop him. "If you interfere, it proves I am weak. It proves I need a human to fight my battles. This must be one-on-one." She looked at him, her silver eyes burning with a terrified intensity. "You have a different mission. Get to the secondary consoles. Keep the bioweapon locked down. If he wins, if he kills me, he will try to launch it immediately. You have to be the fail-safe." "Kaylira," Ethan started, his chest tightening. "Go!" she shouted. She turned back to Varric. "I accept your challenge, traitor." Ethan gritted his teeth. He looked at Vance and the strike team. "To the consoles," Ethan ordered, his voice rough. "Secure the weapon systems. Do not engage Varric unless the princess is down." The humans scrambled to the perimeter of the room, jacking their data spikes into the secondary banks. Ethan stood by the console, his hands flying across the holographic keys, but his eyes were locked on the center of the room. Varric and Kaelira circled each other. The gravity in the room began to fluctuate as the Nexus gate outside pulsed. The floor tilted. Varric struck first. He moved with a speed that belied his size. The glaive spun, a red blur, aiming for Kaelira's head. She ducked, the heat of the plasma singing her hair. She countered with a thrust to his midsection, but his armor hardened instantly at the point of impact, deflecting the blade with a shower of sparks. They clashed. It was not a choreographed duel, it was a brawl. Varric used his superior weight to drive her back. He slammed the butt of his glaive into her chest, sending her skidding across the polished floor. Kaelira recovered instantly, using her momentum to run up the wall as the gravity shifted sideways. She launched herself off a support strut, coming down on him from above, her sword hammering against his guard. The sound of plasma clashing was deafening, a high-pitched scream that tore at the ears. Ethan flinched as Kaelira took a glancing blow to the shoulder. Her armor absorbed most of it, but he saw her stumble. He felt the spike of pain in his own shoulder, a phantom echo through the bond. "Hold the lock!" Vance shouted from the other console. "Sovereign 9 is trying to bypass the virus." "I am holding it," Ethan yelled back, forcing himself to look at the code, to focus on the encryption keys while the woman he loved fought for her life 10 feet away. In the center of the room, the fight intensified. Varric was relentless. He was a veteran of a dozen border wars, and he fought with brutal efficiency. He wasn't trying to disarm her, he was trying to break her. "You fight like a child," Varric taunted, locking weapons with her and pushing her face close to his. "You hold back. You are afraid to kill your own blood. I am afraid of becoming you." Kaelira gritted out, straining against his strength. "That is why you will lose," Varric roared. He head-butted her. The impact of his armored helm against hers cracked her visor. Kaelira reeled back, stunned. Varric swept her legs out from under her. She hit the deck hard. Before she could rise, he brought his boot down on her sword arm, pinning it. He raised the glaive for a killing strike. Ethan screamed her name, but Kaelira didn't panic. She twisted her wrist, releasing her sword. She reached with her free hand to her belt and pulled a gravity charge. She didn't throw it at him. She slapped it onto his ankle. She rolled away just as she triggered it. The charge detonated. It didn't explode. It created a localized singularity. Varric's leg was yanked sideways with bone-shattering force. He howled, losing his balance, the glaive carving a gouge in the floor as he fell. Kaelira scrambled up. She snatched her sword from the floor. Varric was struggling to stand, the gravity well pinning his leg. Kaelira didn't hesitate. She lunged. She drove her shoulder into his chest, tackling him. They tumbled together, weightless for a second as the ship's stabilizers failed against the gate's interference. They slammed into the main viewport, the glass cracking under the impact. Outside, the violet vortex swirled, hungry and vast. Kaelira pinned him. She had her knee on his chest, her blade at his throat. The tip of her sword hovered an inch from his jugular, humming with lethal potential. Varric stared up at her. His helmet was gone, torn off in the scuffle. His face was bloodied, his golden eyes wide with shock and fury. "Do it!" Varric hissed, spittle flying from his lips. The entire fleet was watching. The Empress was watching. Ethan was watching. "Finish it!" Varric goaded her. "Show them. Show them that to keep the throne. You must spill the blood of your kin. Prove to the humans that we are monsters." Kaelira's hand trembled. Her lips were pulled back in a snarl, her fangs fully extended. Her eyes were burning with adrenaline and hate. She wanted to do it. Ethan could feel it, a tidal wave of red fury crashing through the neural link. Varric had threatened her world. He had tried to kill Ethan. He represented everything that was rotting in the Dravari soul. "Strike me down," Varric screamed, "and be the tyrant you claim to hate," Kaelira roared, raising the blade higher. "Kaelira!" The voice didn't come from the room. It came from the ship's speakers. Ethan had patched his comms directly into the general address channel. His voice echoed not just in the dome, but on every bridge of every ship in the Armada. Kaylira, listen to me. Ethan's voice was raw, desperate. She froze. The blade hung in the air. Don't do it, Ethan said. He wasn't looking at the console anymore. He was looking at her back. Look at him. He wants you to kill him. He wants you to prove that power only comes from death. Kaylira's breathing was ragged. She didn't look back, but her head tilted slightly. Listening. You are not him, Ethan said. You told me that love isn't about erasing what you are. It is about choosing what you do with your teeth. The silence in the room was heavy. Remember the bite? Ethan asked softly. You didn't bite me to kill me. You bit me to claim me. You made a choice to build a connection instead of a corpse. He took a step away from the console, walking into the open floor, ignoring Vance's warning hiss. If you kill him now, Ethan said, you are just another warlord. But if you spare him, you rewrite the rules. Show them that a Dravari can have fangs and still choose mercy. Be the queen who broke the cycle. Kaylira stared down at Varric. Varric looked up, his eyes darting between Kaylira and the human who dared to speak of honor. She is weak, Varric spat. She listens to the prey. Kaylira's silver eyes locked onto Varric's. The fury began to drain away, replaced by something colder, harder, and infinitely more regal. He is not prey, Kaylira said, her voice steady and amplified for the galaxy to hear. He is my consort, and he is right. She lowered the blade. Varric looked confused. You spare me. You insult me. I do not spare you for your sake, Kaylira said. I spare you because you are not worth the stain on my soul. She reached down and ripped the High Commander's crest from his armor. The metal screeched as she tore it free. She stood up, holding the crest high. Varric of House Ethelgard, Kaylira announced, her voice ringing with authority. You are stripped of rank. You are stripped of name. You are no longer High Commander, still you are nothing. She tossed the crest to the floor. Varric scrambled up, looking at his empty chest plate. Kill me, he shrieked. You cannot leave me like this. I leave you to the judgment of the people you tried to turn into murderers, Kaylira said coldly. She turned her back on him. Ethan, she said. Finish it, Ethan smiled. He turned back to the console. Vance, execute the purge. Vance hit the key. The virus completed its work. The bioweapon canisters in the launch tubes were flushed, not onto Earth, but into the incinerators. The targeting computers were wiped. And then, Ethan reconfigured the Nexus gate. Closing the gate, Ethan announced, dumping residual energy into the void. The vortex outside the window flared one last time, a blinding white flash, and then collapsed. The swirling violet chaos vanished, replaced by the calm, indifferent starlight of the Terran frontier. The room was silent. Varric fell to his knees, a broken man staring at the empty stars. He had lost the war, but worse, he had lost the argument. Kaylira walked toward Ethan. She sheathed her sword. She stopped in front of him, ignoring the wreckage, the soldiers, and the watching cameras. You talk too much, mammal, she whispered, but her eyes were shining. I had a captive audience, Ethan replied, breathless. She reached out and touched his cheek. Thank you. The aftermath was not a parade. It was a chaotic, messy unraveling of tensions. The Empress did not wait for the fleet to return to Varaxis Prime. She sent a holographic transmission to the obsidian spear within the hour. She looked old, her bioluminescence dim, but her voice was firm. She acknowledged Varric's treachery. She acknowledged her own failure to stop it. And then, she abdicated. The empire needs new blood. The empress had said, it needs a ruler who understands that the universe is not just a hunting ground. The treaty signing took place 3 days later, on neutral ground, a space station orbiting Jupiter. It was a tense affair. The human delegation was suspicious. The Dravari admirals were proud and defensive. But they signed. It wasn't a treaty of friendship. Not yet. It was a treaty of non-aggression, a partnership. It included safeguards, inspections, and cultural exchange programs. It was fragile, written in ink and pixels, but it held. Epilogue. 6 months later. The balcony of the Imperial Palace on Varaxis Prime overlooked a city that was changing. The crimson sun was setting, casting long shadows over the spires. But there were new lights in the sky, Terran transport ships, moving in the designated flight lanes, bringing trade goods instead of warheads. Ethan leaned against the living bone railing, wearing a uniform that was a hybrid of Terran formal wear and Dravari silk. He watched the traffic. You know, he said, sipping a glass of blue nectar. On Earth, when you start dating someone, you usually bring them flowers, maybe chocolate. You don't usually start by biting a hole in their shoulder and dragging them through a sewer. Kaylira stepped up beside him. She was not wearing armor. She wore a gown of shimmering silver mesh that left her shoulders bare, exposing the intricate bioluminescent patterns that marked her as Empress. Humans have very boring courtship rituals, she retorted, leaning her hip against the railing. Flowers die, chocolate is consumed, a scar lasts forever. It is practical. Practical, Ethan laughed. Is that what we are calling it? Kaylira turned to him. She set her glass down. She looked him over, her metallic eyes gleaming with that familiar predatory playfulness. Are you complaining, consort? No, Ethan said. I'm just saying. My mother was very confused when I explained the wedding vows. She kept asking if she needed to get a tetanus shot before the ceremony. Kaylira snorted, a distinctly unroyal sound. She moved closer, trapping him against the railing. Her height was still intimidating, her presence still a force of nature. Your mother adores me, Kaylira said. She called me striking. She called you terrifyingly gorgeous, Ethan corrected. There's a difference, Kaylira smirked. She leaned in, her face inches from his neck. She inhaled his scent, closing her eyes. One more look, she whispered. The old threat turned into an endearment. And I'll bite you. Ethan finished for her. She didn't bite him hard. She leaned down and nipped the muscle of his other shoulder, the unscarred one. It was gentle, barely a graze of teeth against skin, but it sent a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with fear. Consider it a second signature on our treaty, she murmured against his skin, to keep the balance. Ethan wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close. You know this is going to be hard, he said quietly, looking out at the city. Half your court still thinks I'm a pet. Half of Earth thinks you're a ticking time bomb. Let them talk, Kaylira said, pulling back to look at him. We have work to do. We have to reform the education caste. We have to integrate the trade guilds. We have to teach 1 billion Dravari that they can be strong without being cruel. And we have to teach 1 billion humans that looking at someone with fangs doesn't mean seeing a monster. Ethan added. Kaylira smiled. It was a genuine smile, showing the tips of her teeth. Then we had better get started. A chime sounded from the palace. The ceremony is starting, Kaylira said. The Grand Assembly. They are waiting for the Empress and her consort. Ethan straightened his jacket. He felt the phantom heat of the bite mark on his shoulder. He felt the weight of the galaxy watching them. Are you ready? he asked. Kalira took his hand, her claws retracted, her fingers interlacing with his. Always, she said. They walked back inside, side by side. The Grand Assembly Hall was filled with thousands of delegates, humans in suits, Dravari in armor, and a dozen other species from the Concord. As the doors opened, the roar of the crowd washed over them. Ethan felt the hesitation in the room, the fear, the curiosity. He saw the stares directed at their joined hands. He didn't flinch. Kalira squeezed his hand. She stood tall, the bioluminescence on her skin flaring a brilliant, confident gold. She didn't hide her fangs. She smiled. Ethan rested his free hand over the scar beneath his uniform, a private anchor in a public storm. They stepped forward together, walking into the light of the hollow cameras. They were different species. They were former enemies. They were predator and prey, soldier and royalty. To some, they were a scandal. To others, a threat. But as they stood before the galaxy, united in a bond that defied biology and politics, they were living proof of a new truth. The future didn't belong to the fearful. It belonged to the brave enough to love what they did not understand. Kalira looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Kalira. And in that shared glance, the monsters and the heroes faded away, leaving only two people ready to build a world where everyone, no matter how sharp their teeth, could find a place to call home.